Welcome to the Monsters Among Us podcast. This is Season 2, Episode 21, The O'Hare UFO Sighting. Today, we're plunging into, well, a really fascinating event. It happened at one of the world's busiest places, O'Hare International Airport in Chicago.
Yeah, back in 2006. Something pretty extraordinary apparently happened right there above the runways.
Exactly. But the real mystery, and this is what our sources really dig into, isn't just what people saw. It's how the whole thing was officially handled afterwards. We've got articles, we've got reports, witness accounts here, and they really paint this picture of a huge contrast,
Yeah,
between what these highly trained professionals reported seeing
people working right there.
and then this swift, almost technology-driven dismissal that came down from the authorities.
That's spot on. This deep dive is really all about that tension, that central conflict. You've got people whose entire job involves scanning the skies, the tarmac, everything. Pilots, ramp workers, supervisors, and they're reporting something genuinely anomalous, something strange. And then the official channels basically say, well, our machines didn't kick it up, so.
So it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Or wasn't important.
Exactly. It really makes you question how we process stuff that doesn't fit, especially in these kinds of critical, high-security places.
Okay, so let's get into what the sources actually say happened that day.
Yeah.
The date was November 7th, 2006.
Yep.
And the time was just after 4:15 p.m. Central Standard Time. So picture it. Late afternoon, O'Hare, busy as always.
Right. Standard stuff.
And the first sighting, according to these sources, it came from a ramp employee, someone out there on the tarmac, right in the middle of it all, pushing back United Airlines Flight 446,
Okay.
bound for Charlotte.
Yeah.
And they looked up and saw something. Well, something that shouldn't have been there.
And that something immediately got the attention of the flight crew on Flight 44 and 6, too, didn't it?
It did.
But this wasn't just one or two people. The sources really stressed this point. The object was apparently seen by about a dozen United Airlines employees.
A dozen.
Yeah, pilots, airline management, mechanics, plus that first ramp worker. These are, people whose careers literally depend on accurate observation in a really complex environment.
That's a key point.
Yeah.
The sources make the credibility of these witnesses. And it wasn't only people at the airport, right? Our material mentions others, too.
That's right. There were also independent witnesses, people outside the airport grounds entirely, who apparently saw something very similar.
Okay, so what did all these people actually describe seeing? What was this thing?
Well, based on the accounts we have in the sources, the descriptions kind of converge on a metallic saucer-shaped craft.
Saucer ship.
Yeah. It was reported hovering silently right over Gate C17.
Silently over a busy airport gate.
Completely silent. And the size estimates, well, they varied a bit, as you might expect.
Yeah.
But generally somewhere between, say, 6 and 24 feet in diameter.
And the color?
Consistently described as dark gray.
Wow. A silent, dark gray metallic disc just hanging there over Gate C17, broad daylight at O'Hare. That's quite a picture.
It really is.
And you mentioned the independent witnesses outside the airport. There was a pretty striking detail from one of them, wasn't there?
Yes, that one really jumps out from the sources.
Yeah.
This witness described seeing a disc hovering, and they specifically said it was obviously not clouds.
Okay.
And then they reported seeing this thing shoot straight up, like through the cloud cover at incredibly high speed.
Whoosh.
Yeah. And it left behind what they described as a clear blue hole in the clouds. And the sources add that this hole apparently just closed up again shortly after the object went through.
A blue hole in the clouds that seals itself. That just adds another layer of weirdness, doesn't it?
It really does. It's a very unusual detail.
How long did this whole sighting retortedly last? From start to finish?
According to the reports we have, the object was visible for about 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, so you've got numerous trained observers, people outside the airport, seeing this silent metallic thing hovering for a good chunk of time.
Yeah.
But didn't see it.
And here's where that core conflict, that tension we talked about, really comes into play.
Right.
Despite being seen visually, apparently by quite a few people right over the airport, the sources confirm no air traffic controllers reported seeing it.
Nobody in the tower?
Nope, not visually. And crucially, it did not show up on radar at all.
Ah. And that lack of radar data feels like it's going to be really important later, doesn't it?
It becomes central, yeah.
Now, the sources also mention something else, though. They point out there were some inconsistencies, even among the eyewitnesses themselves.
That's an important point, and the sources do bring it up. It was something critics latched onto.
How so?
Well, the material notes that not all the accounts lined up perfectly on every single detail. Things like the precise shape, was it perfectly round or slightly oval? The exact height it was hovering at.
Okay.
Its movement, if any, before it shot up. The exact time people saw it. Even apparently whether it was one object or maybe more than one. And the sources say some people use these variations to question if the whole thing was real or maybe even suggest it was, like, a hoax.
But, I mean, is perfect agreement really what you'd expect when multiple people see something sudden and totally unexpected like that?
That's the counterpoint, isn't it? Eyewitness testimony often has variations. Does that automatically invalidate the core observation? That's the debate.
So, multiple reports, credible witnesses, an object over the airport, but no radar hit. How did the powers that be, the official authorities, react to this?
Well, initially, denial.
Really? Just flat-out denial?
Yeah. Both United Airlines and the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, they initially said they just had no information about any sighting, nothing to report.
Which seems odd, given maybe a dozen of their own people saw something.
Exactly. And the sources really credit the Chicago Tribune newspaper here. They started digging into these reports.
Good journalism.
And they filed a Freedom of Information Act request, a FOIA request, basically forcing the FAA to hand over any records.
The FOIA. Always useful for getting things out in the open. What did that turn up?
Well, the FAA had to go back and review their internal communication tapes, air traffic control stuff. And guess what?
They found something.
They found a recorded call from a United supervisor on the ground calling an FAA manager up in the airport tower, specifically reporting the UFO sighting.
So they did know. It was reported internally, despite the initial denial.
It was definitely communicated internally, yes.
But finding that call didn't really change the official story, did it? What was the FAA's final public conclusion?
Their official conclusion, according to all the sources, was that the sighting was caused by a weather phenomenon.
Weather, to explain a silent metallic disc hovering over a gate.
Yep, weather phenomenon. And based on that, they said they weren't going to investigate any further.
And their reason was?
Primarily the fact that the object didn't appear on radar. That was their main justification for closing the book on it.
Did they offer any specific kind of weather that could look like that?
Well, the sources mentioned the Tribune consulted an astronomer, Mark Hammergren, and he suggested that the weather conditions that day were actually right for something called a hole punch cloud.
A hole punch cloud. Is that a real thing?
It is, yeah. It's a real, though pretty rare atmospheric phenomenon where a hole can appear in a cloud layer.
Okay. But the witnesses described a metallic object, dark gray, saucer-shaped. Not just a hole in the clouds. How did UFO investigators react to the FAA just calling it weather and moving on?
Oh, they reacted strongly, as you'd expect. The sources say they heavily criticized the FAA.
On what grounds?
Their main argument was that the FAA's refusal to investigate properly actually goes against the agency's own rules, their mandate to look into any potential security breaches, especially at a major airport like O'Hare.
Makes sense.
Their point was, look, forget the radar for a second. You had numerous professional employees reporting an unidentified object hovering over a secure area. That alone should trigger a full security investigation, shouldn't it? Not just a dismissal based on one sensor system.
It really highlights that clash again, doesn't it? Human eyes versus the machines.
Absolutely. What do you trust when they disagree?
And what about the people who actually saw this thing, the ramp worker, the pilots? How did they feel about the official explanation?
According to the Chicago Tribune's reporting, which actually spoke to some of them, well, some were reportedly pretty upset.
I can imagine.
Yeah, they felt they'd seen something truly strange, something important, and it just got brushed off as weather and dropped. Ignored, basically.
So despite that official dismissal, this story clearly didn't just vanish. How did the media and, the wider culture react once the Tribune broke the story?
Oh, it definitely took off. Once that Tribune article hit, the story got picked up everywhere. Major news outlets. We're talking CNN, CBS, MSNBC, Fox News, NPR ran stories on it. It really blew up into a national news item for a while.
It definitely tapped into that ongoing fascination with UFOs, or UAP as they're often called now.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the news, right? It popped up elsewhere.
No, absolutely. It became kind of a classic case study in shows that focus on this sort of thing. The sources list appearances on series like UFO Hunters,
Right.
Hangar One, the UFO Files, even Ancient Aliens mentioned it. It sort of cemented its place in that whole unexplained phenomena lore.
And it even bled into popular entertainment a bit, too.
That's right, yeah. The sources note it got a mention in the movie UFO and also in an episode of the TV drama Boston Legal. So it definitely made a cultural ripple.
Okay, so let's try and pull these threads together from the sources. You have these detailed sightings, multiple credible witnesses, ramp workers, pilots, supervisors, people trained to observe,
Right.
describing this silent, metallic, saucer-like thing just hanging there over a busy O'Hare gate for 5 minutes.
A pretty clear picture from them.
But then, contrasted starkly with the official conclusion, weather phenomena, based almost entirely on the fact it didn't show up on radar, which led to the whole thing being essentially dismissed.
And that really throws that central question into sharp relief, doesn't it? What counts as valid evidence? Especially when you have human observation, from trained people no less, directly contradicting the tech data.
Yeah.
In a place like an airport where safety and observation are paramount, what do you do when something is clearly seen, but not seen by the standard systems we rely on?
It really does make you stop and think. Given that weight of witness testimony professionals, remember versus the official line tied so tightly to the radar, what does this whole O'Hare incident tell us, maybe, about how we classify or maybe even dismiss things that just don't fit the mold, especially in these highly controlled, monitored environments?
It's a fascinating question with no easy answers. How do institutions handle the genuinely unknown when it pops up unexpectedly?
Something definitely to ponder. That is the end of this episode. Until next time.
Yeah.
Keep to the shadows. Some legends are best left undiscovered.